The following is a mock trial performed by Mr. Dawe's 2019 law class at Montville High School. We are calling into question the ruling of the 1999 People v. KEVORKIA'Ns second-degree murder case. Make sure to tell us your verdict at the end of the video.
On March 26, 1999, Dr. Jack KEVORKIAN was convicted of second-degree murder after videotaping himself injecting Thomas Youk with substances that ended his life. On September 17, 1998, KEVORKIAN killed Youk and recorded the killing. On November 22, 1998, that tape aired on CBS during the program 60 Minutes. Youk suffered from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. KEVORKIAN recorded Youk consenting to his assisted suicide, agreeing to die at the hands of KEVORKIAN. Regardless of what conditions Thomas Youk suffered from, KEVORKIAN killed this man. There was nobody else in the room who could have administered the drugs. Youk was unable to do it himself because of his condition. KEVORKIAN, and only KEVORKIAN, was responsible for the death of Thomas Youk. Jack KEVORKIAN killed Thomas Youk. In KEVORKIAN's trial, which took place in March of 1999, KEVORKIAN represented himself in court. He even showed up to court one day wearing colonial garments. KEVORKIAN did nothing but make a fool of himself, something that he was no stranger to. KEVORKIAN tried to convince the jury not that he hadn't killed Youk, but that it was right for him to have killed Youk. What Jack KEVORKIAN did to Thomas Youk can never come close to being right. He killed Youk. KEVORKIAN knew he did it, as did everyone else in the courtroom. Michigan state law defines first-degree murder as, quote, murder perpetrated by means of poison, lying in wait, or any other willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing, end quote. Murder perpetrated by poison. It's the very first cause outlined in the legislature. Murder perpetrated by poison. Is that not exactly what Jack KEVORKIAN did? He killed Thomas Youk using poisonous drugs that he knew were poisonous, and it certainly was premeditated because he was conscious enough to record Youk before the killing. Mind you, that was first-degree murder. KEVORKIAN was convicted for second-degree murder, which is simply any other type of murder. If anything, KEVORKIAN's sentence should be made worse, not overturned. Not to mention, this wasn't the only time KEVORKIAN had done something like this. He had been brought to trial 4 times prior to Thomas Youk's death because he aided over 130 of his patients in the termination of their lives. Some of these patients didn't even have illnesses that were terminal. KEVORKIAN invented a suicide machine, which he would provide his patients with so they could end their lives. It isn't unheard of for doctors to try and help patients' pain go away, but what KEVORKIAN did to so many of his patients, as well as what he did to Youk, was. It is silly for us to be in this courtroom today. Jack KEVORKIAN killed a man almost 20 years ago, and we are questioning the morality of this man when the original trial came to a conclusion in only 2 days. What Jack KEVORKIAN did was sick, borderline evil, and the last thing we should do is forgive what he did.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. We are here today to decide whether Jack KEVORKIAN is guilty of second-degree murder against former race car driver Thomas Youk. Thomas Youk, diagnosed with ALS, sought Dr. KEVORKIAN's services on September of 1998. On September 15th, KEVORKIAN videotaped Youk where he explained his symptoms. He explained to KEVORKIAN that he had been confined to a wheelchair since 1997. He stopped being able to move his arms and legs in September of 1998. He had difficulty breathing and swallowing. He was fed through a tube and was forced to use a machine to be able to breathe. Thomas Youk was in excruciating pain and wanted to be released from it. He wanted mercy, which Dr. KEVORKIAN complied to. KEVORKIAN made Youk sign his consent in being lethally injected. His consent form read, I, Thomas Youk, the undersigned, entirely voluntarily, without any reservation, external persuasion, pressure, or duress, and after prolonged and thorough deliberation, hereby consent to the following medical procedure of my own choosing, and that you have chosen direct injection, or what they call active euthanasia, to be administered by a competent medical professional in order to end with certainty my intolerable and hopelessly incurable suffering. On September 6th, KEVORKIAN recorded Youk's euthanasia. In this video, it showed that Youk did not struggle against KEVORKIAN's injection. He consented to this procedure in spoken word and written word. The Hippocratic oath that doctors swear by says that, if it is given to me to save a life, all thanks, but it may also be within my power to take a life. This awesome responsibility must be faced with great humbleness and awareness of my own frailty. Dr. Jack KEVORKIAN did not violate his oath as a doctor. Thomas Youk's ALS was incurable and would only get worse over time as the majority of ALS cases occur. He only provided mercy to his patient suffering from an incurable disease. It is not second-degree murder either, because Thomas Youk gave his explicit consent, which murder victims do not. Youk's family also supported his decision to end his life, which again, in murder victims, does not happen. Terry Youk, his own brother, stated, "I, of course, felt that Jack Kevorkian never should have gone to prison. I don't believe that the medical service he provided for my brothers and others is a crime. I think people will look back and see that Jack was the only person that was willing to stand up during a divisive time and fight for what should be a right for all human beings to have choices at the end of their life. I think Jack provided for people that had fallen through the cracks of the healthcare system a way to die with peace and dignity. Ultimately, Jack Kevorkian was our only option. It was all well and good to suggest that people should have had available better palliative medical care. But the truth is that it wasn't available. The system had failed them and continues to fail them. For many, like my brother, some symptoms defy effective treatment, like phantom nerve pain and choking that plague many ALS patients. I am very grateful to Jack Kevorkian. I feel like he was a compassionate practitioner for my brother at the end of his life." If his own brother supported Thomas Youk's decision to receive euthanasia, why should we, people who never knew Thomas Youk, oppose his last wish? Animals, for example, get cancer are often euthanized so that they would not have to suffer in pain. It has become a common practice now. So what is the difference with humans who are also suffering in pain? We treat animals better than human beings who wish to receive mercy from their suffering. Jack Kevorkian only complied to his patients' deepest wishes to be free from the excruciating pain their terminal disease brought them. I hope you see that this is not a trial for a supposed murder, but a trial of ethics. The ethics in whether a human being has a choice to do what they want with their own body, if they deserve mercy or not, and they deserve mercy.
Jack Kevorkian's victims all had diseases from multiple sclerosis to different kinds of cancers, which are the reasons why Kevorkian had them kill them. But what you don't know is that not all of Jack Kevorkian's victims had terminal diseases. Some had diseases that weren't terminal, in fact. For example, Mary Judith had Huntington's disease, Janice Murphy had chronic fatigue syndrome, and Marjorie Wentz had suffered from pelvic pain. These diseases listed were not terminal, and a small amount were curable, in fact. However, Jack Kevorkian never mentioned any of this during his trial for second-degree murder. A total of 11 victims suffered from non-life-threatening diseases. It's no wonder that his medical license was suspended. It was suspended when an administrative law judge declared him a clear and present danger to the people of California. Jack Kevorkian had always been a fan of euthanasia and assisted suicide. In fact, in 1987, he started advertising in Detroit newspapers about being a physician consultant for death counseling. He also attempted to advertise his suicide machine, but it was rejected by a medical society publication and local newspapers. However, he managed to draw in his first victim, Janet Atkins. For most of his victims, he used his suicide machine that he created himself, which was like a euthanasia machine. Kevorkian would just pull a string and the dangerous chemicals would administer themselves into the victim's body and kill them. However, for one of his victims, Thomas Youk, Kevorkian directly injected the chemicals into Youk's body himself. He also made a recorded video of it, which was used and played as trial for Thomas Youk's death. Even after he lost his medical license, he did not stop helping others kill themselves. He even dared prosecutors to arrest him while showing he had no remorse for the lives he had taken. He once said in an interview that he has a desire to assist in the deaths of 20 to 30-year-olds who are not ill but just don't want to live anymore. He was reckless in his killings because what if someone lied about being terminally ill and just wanted Kevorkian to help him or her kill themselves? Does that still count as aiding his patients? Does that mean it's still a normal procedure that is legal euthanasia? Jack Kevorkian did all this to prove a point about assisted suicide.
Dr. Kevorkian appeared on a TV segment called 60 Minutes. He was there to discuss euthanasia for patients who have long-term illnesses. When he appeared on 60 Minutes, he brought a tape with him demonstrating an assisted death. The victim in the tape that was being shown on national television was a man named Thomas Youk. He was a 52-year-old man who had Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as ALS. His death was staged for the cameras, and the term used for his death was a stun death. In the video, Kevorkian gave Youk 3 injections. The first injection was called Second One, which is used to calm patients down before surgery. Seconal also slows down the activity of your brain and nervous system. It's used to treat insomnia and is used as a sedative in surgery. But in Youk's instance, it was used to put him to sleep. The next injection was anstantine. Anstantine is an ultra-short-acting depolarizing type of skeletal muscle relaxant. It can cause an increase in intraocular pressure immediately after it's been injected, and this slight pressure can cause complete paralysis. The final injection was potassium chloride. Potassium chloride affects the electrical conduction of the heart. This injection was used to stop Youk's heart. All three of these drugs are controlled substances, meaning they are not allowed to be administered by anyone other than a doctor. Since Kevorkian lost his medical license, he has no authorization to possess them. He broke the law by giving and using these drugs. After his death, the police were dispatched to his home where they found him lying on his bed. The medical examiners who conducted his autopsy ruled it as a homicide. The cause of his death was poisonous intravenous injection of substances. A medical examiner also noticed he had 2 needle marks on his arm covered in makeup. A medical examiner also took notice of the amount of seconal that was in his blood. The amount in his blood was enough to kill him in a few hours. The amount of anstantine in his blood alone could have killed him in 5 to 8 minutes by causing brain death. But what killed him was the potassium chloride by causing his heart to stop. The reports of his death also showed that ALS had no contribution to his death in any way. It was the poisons injected into him making his death a homicide. The 60-minute interview also included a balance. Dr. Mark Stiegler, a medical ethicist at the University of Chicago, calls Kevorkian's actions a medicalized killing and says it's dangerous to patients and dangerous to society. On national television, Kevorkian even dared the legal system to try and stop him.
Dr. Kevorkian helped chronically ill and terminally ill patients commit suicide. In 1990, he hooked up a 54-year-old Alzheimer's patient to his homemade suicide machine and watched as she pushed a button to release lethal drugs. He liked to be in the public eye, and as he was in the public, his ego was growing as well. He was happy to hook up patients without long-term knowledge of their cases or any corroborating medical judgment that they were terminally ill or suffering beyond hope of relief with aggression, palliative care. In 1991, Jack's medical license was suspended and he continued his experiments without his license. He allowed the CBS television news program 60 Minutes to air a tape, and he made the lethal injection of Thomas Youk. Thomas Youk had Lou Gehrig's disease, and Jack had to inject Thomas himself. This caused Jack to get charged with second-degree murder. A high proportion of his patients have been women, giving rise to the charge of misogyny, and some appear not to have been suffering from any fatal condition at the time of their demise. For example, his 35th case, Judith Curran, was found at past mortem to be suffering from nothing other than obesity. The Michigan law states a person who commits any of the following is a guilty first-degree murder and shall be punished by imprisonment for life without eligibility for parole. Murder perpetrated by means of poison, lying in wait, or any willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing. In Michigan, Kevorkian was initially charged with violating the state statute in addition to the first-degree murder and delivering a controlled substance without a license. In 1998, the Michigan legislature created a law making assisted suicide a felony punishable by a maximum of 5-year prison sentence or $10,000 fine. They also closed a loophole that allowed for Kevorkian previous acquittals, yet Kevorkian still continued to assist people. The courts continued to pursue Kevorkian on criminal charges.
Claims against Jack Kevorkian say that he has killed people before their time. But all Jack Kevorkian did was help patients end their suffering faster. When a patient wants to end their life, they will do whatever they have to do to die. In the video, it shows the only way patients could die in the hospital when they wanted to go was to stop eating, stop drinking, and stop taking medication. Jack Kevorkian felt like a patient should not need to starve or dehydrate themselves for their suffering to end, as they shouldn't have to. Making a person starve to death is completely unethical, so Jack created a machine to help them pass away without any pain. The most peaceful and natural way for a person to die is in their sleep, and that is the whole objective of the machine. First, it makes the patient go to sleep so they cannot feel anything, and then the drugs stop the heart. Jack was doing what any physician was supposed to do. As a physician, their job is to treat and ease the pain or any suffering that the patient is going through. He isn't just mercilessly killing random people. People with very serious medical conditions that are untreatable come to him with their suffering. He has helped people with many diseases like ALS, cancer, heart disease, and many more. People like Janet Atkins, Thomas Hyde, Thomas Youk, and many other patients knew that they were going to suffer for the rest of their lives through massive pain, and they did not want to deal with that. Jack is not a murderer. He had full support of the patient and the patient's family. In the video, it shows a small clip of Thomas Hyde and his fiancée, Heidi Fernandez, saying how Thomas wants to die, and Heidi showing full support of Jack's actions with, quote, "I want Tom to be free. I've watched him suffer for too long." Jack is not deciding when these people should die. He is just giving them the means to do so. He is not playing God in any sort of way. He is not deciding when a person should die or not. He is just helping suffering people out when they feel like they have no other solution. As I said before, the patient decides when they want to die. If giving them drugs to pass peacefully is wrong, then what would be the better alternative? The drugs are a lot better than making a person starve and dehydrate. He did what any physician was supposed to do and ease the pain and suffering that the patient was going through.
Dr. Jack Kevorkian was convicted of second-degree murder. In actuality, what he was doing was relieving the pain of terminally ill patients that hardly had any time left to live and were in constant pain. He gave them the relief that they were asking for. Second-degree murder is defined as an intentional killing that is not premeditated or planned, nor committed in a reasonable heat of passion, or a killing caused by dangerous conduct in the offender's obvious lack of concern for human life. Kevorkian can't possibly be charged with second degree because he did not recklessly take someone's life. As a doctor, you want to relieve a patient's pain, and that's what he has done at his patient's request. Also, a murderer takes someone's life without permission, obviously, but people went out of their way to ask him if he would do this favor for them. There are states in America that do have legalized euthanasia through medication. These states include Washington, Hawaii, Vermont, Montana, Oregon, as well as Washington, D.C. So if Kevorkian had performed some of his actions in these states, then we wouldn't even need to be here today. Also, speaking of Colorado, the state has a Death with Dignity Act. This lets people who are terminally ill with 6 months or less to live to be eligible for lethal prescription medications. This is all to say that the reason the doctor is here today is simply because he is vocal about his work. He wants to spread the word of this basic human right. If every human is entitled to life, then why shouldn't they be entitled to death? A death that will come regardless. He just has the humanity to help people end their life quicker. The doctor has argued himself that his rights should be protected under the 9th Amendment, which states, quote, "The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be constructed to deny or disparage others retained by the people," end quote. In simpler terms, this means that even if rights aren't explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, they are not treated any less than the ones that are, and won't be demeaned in any way. The right to death, just as the right to live, is held by all people. It doesn't have to be stated. A murderer should not have support from anyone else, and typically they don't unless it's another murderer. Dr. Kevorkian was thanked by the brother of Terry Youk, who had Lou Gehrig's disease and whom he had helped end his life. Thomas thanked Kevorkian for the service he did for his brother Terry, saying, quote, "It was a medical service that was requested and, from my point of view, compassionately provided by Jack. It should not be a crime," end quote. Terry's wife Melody stated that her husband, quote, "would be greatly distressed that the man who brought him peace at the end would now be suffering on his account." If a family member thought their loved one was killed out of rage, they would hate the one responsible. They would want justice for the death of the person that they lost. And yet, they were grateful for the service they had provided. A murderer doesn't get thanked, but a person who has done something noble does. Just for a comparison so we can see how absurd Kevorkian's conviction is, we'll talk about a couple other second-degree murder cases. In 2014, a woman named Laura Hayes was convicted of second-degree murder when she and her husband Grant killed 27-year-old Laura Ackerson. Ackerson was Grant's ex-wife, and the two of them were going through a custody battle over their 2 children. So Laura and Grant cut Ackerson's body into pieces, attempted to dissolve her in acid, and then threw what was left in a creek occupied by alligators. Another example is Michael McCarthy, who killed his girlfriend's 2-year-old daughter, Bella Bond, in 2015. He killed the child, concealed her body in a trash bag, and threw her into Deer River in New York. Both of them, Michael and the mother Rachel, were heroin addicts. She said on the night of her daughter's death that she saw McCarthy punch the baby in the stomach so hard that she bounced from her bed, and Bond had said she'd been told by McCarthy that it was her time to die. She was a demon, referring to the baby. These people were remorseless killers. They brutally killed other innocent people who deserved to live as much as anyone else. These killers are nothing like Kevorkian. He cares for people. People who don't believe in euthanasia because of religious beliefs or see this as an immoral murder, I'm asking you to please see this differently. This was an act of care. People give life its value. They give their own lives value. So it's up to every person to say whether or not their life is worth living. If you know you're not going to live and you're in constant pain day in and day out, you should have every right to end that pain humanely.
The famous Jack Kevorkian, a former pathologist, is known for publicly campaigning a terminal patient's right to die. Kevorkian helped patients that were suffering of fatal diseases quicken their deaths so they wouldn't feel any pain. He believes dying isn't a crime, especially if you already have one foot in the grave. 67-year-old Marcella Lawrence was diagnosed with a heart disease, arthritis, and emphysema. Emphysema is a condition in which air is abnormally present within the body tissues. The air sacs of the lungs have enlarged and are damaged. Janet Atkins, a 54-year-old woman who was diagnosed in 1989 with Alzheimer's disease. She was Kevorkian's first public assisted suicide. Charges were dropped on Atkins' case later on due to the fact that there were no laws in Michigan regarding euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide at that time. The state of Michigan did not like what he was proposing, therefore, they took away his medical license. Euthanasia is performed by a physician who injects a fatal dose of a drug to the patient on the patient's request. The difference between physician-assisted suicide is where the patient supplies the drug, the physician supplies the drug, but the patient injects themselves. Kevorkian was said to have helped many suffering patients. These patients were all terminally ill and sought him out. Some of Kevorkian's patients were diagnosed with illnesses such as Parkinson's, cancer, Lou Gehrig's heart disease, and Tay-Sachs. There are some treatments for some diseases, but these have no cure. It wasn't until after Kevorkian started helping his patients suffering that euthanasia law went into effect. What's curious is that Michigan has a law forbidding euthanasia, but also has a law which promotes the ability of terminally ill patients to meet death on their own terms and request life-ending medications. I find it exquisitely hard to believe that what Jack Kevorkian did was anything less than human. As much as we would all love to have spent as much time with the ones we love as much as possible, sometimes it's better to think of their needs rather than our own. Separating ourselves and your emotional attachment is the only way you will come to the realization that they are in a better, safer place, where they no longer are in pain, where there is no such thing as suffering.
An overwhelming majority of Dr. Kevorkian's patients were suffering from cancer, MS, ALS, or quadriplegia. These people endured pains unimaginable consistently, their days passing slowly and dreadfully. Margaret Garish was a patient of his as well. She suffered from rheumatoid arthritis, colonic diverticulitis, and amputated legs. She also had use of only one of her eyes. As mentioned before, Thomas Youk was diagnosed with ALS. He could not move his left arms or legs, and he had minimal use of his right arm, and he had difficulty swallowing or breathing. He was fed through a tube, and a machine was helping him breathe. I want to ask the jury to consider what they would do if forced to live under these conditions. How can hope and joy exist in such an awful quality of life? Our very own Declaration of Independence states that all people are given the unalienable right to pursue happiness. What kind of happiness is a medical patient so broken down and tired of living a life in pain supposed to pursue? For people suffering such conditions that make living a happy life impossible, their only wish might be to have all of their suffering come to an end. This is why patients sought out Dr. Kevorkian, who could give them their only wish. If we deny terminally ill patients and patients in excruciating pain the right to end this pain, then we are denying their unalienable right to happiness. The only thing Dr. Kevorkian's patients like Youk could look forward to and hope for was the end of their suffering. To put him behind bars for murder for this would be ridiculous. That would mean that we must force terminally ill patients to endure the full suffering of their condition and die a slow, painful death. I ask the jury to consider what they would do. What would you do? Would you decide your own fate or let misery continue until it's over? How would you feel if it was illegal for your suffering to end? Dr. Kevorkian should not be charged with murder. All he did was show people mercy who were in need of it and wanted it so badly that they sought out a doctor who could help him.
Thank you, members of the jury, for listening to this trial today. I urge you to reaffirm the conviction of second-degree murder and the delivery of controlled substances. Find Jack Kevorkian guilty of the crimes he has admitted to committing. Because Jack Kevorkian is not a merciful doctor. He is a serial killer, having killed over 130 people. Defense argued today about the strides Kevorkian supposedly made to help those suffering and how he revolutionized the concept of suicide. In reality, he only further alienated the disabled community. He told the entire world that it was okay to kill people with disabilities. He claimed he was helping these people, but the state of Michigan disagrees. Out of these 130 victims, at least 11 of those victims suffered from non-life-threatening illnesses, ranging from pelvic pain to asthma, meaning these people would have lived a long life if Jack Kevorkian never interfered. He never once stopped and questioned why these people with non-life-threatening illnesses wanted to die. He just blindly helped them. If Kevorkian really cared about his victims, he would have offered them alternate options or at least discussed them. His own death even showcases his disregard for his victims. Kevorkian died on June 3, 2011 from pulmonary thrombosis after suffering from liver cancer and kidney problems for many years. The most important aspect of his death was where he died, William Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak, Michigan. If Kevorkian really cared about what he did to all 130 of his victims, he would have hooked himself up to one of his own death machines and killed himself when it became clear there were no cure for his medical issues. That's what he did with his victims. But Kevorkian himself went to a hospital to die, which is where you go when you want someone to try and save you, when you want someone to keep you alive. Because Jack Kevorkian knew life was precious, but only when it came to his own. Jack Kevorkian didn't truly care about his victims. He only cared about the fame they gave him. Why else would he dress up in costume for past court trials or sell the video of Thomas Youk's death to 60 Minutes? His behavior was erratic and in line with someone with no regard for human life. On 60 Minutes, Kevorkian said on camera that he has to force them to act when referring to authorities. Kevorkian likened himself to Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi, called prosecutors Nazis, his critics religious fanatics. He burned state orders against him, showed up at court in costume, called doctors who didn't support him hypocritic oafs, and challenged authorities to just try and stop him. But what he and his defense team don't realize is that this trial is not an argument on whether or not euthanasia should be legal or whether or not people have the right to die. This is a trial to reaffirm Kevorkian's past conviction of second-degree murder and the delivery of controlled substances. In regard to the charge of delivery of controlled substances, Kevorkian had lost his medical license in Michigan 8 years prior to killing Thomas Youk. All 3 of the drugs used to kill Youk were controlled substances, meaning they were drugs that are regulated by law due to the danger they pose. They can only be prescribed by a licensed medical professional. Jack Kevorkian did not have permission to hold these toxic drugs, let alone deliver them to someone else. He broke the law and should be convicted for it. As for the second conviction, second-degree murder in Michigan can be defined as unplanned, intentional killing or a death caused by a reckless disregard for human life. Although the murder of Thomas Youk was intentional, it was not unplanned. But this incident does fit the second part of Michigan's second-degree murder statute. Someone who has killed 130 people definitely has a disregard for human life. When someone purposely injects another human being with what they know is a lethal dose, that is murder. And that is exactly what Jack Kevorkian did. By finding him innocent today, you allow other wannabe doctor deaths to believe that killing disabled people is okay. You are telling them it is okay to have a disregard for human life, that it is okay to break the law. So reaffirm Jack Kevorkian's conviction of second-degree murder and the delivery of controlled substances.
Dr. Kevorkian is not a murderer. I hope that after being presented with the facts today, you will all agree with that. What Dr. Kevorkian did was something that most people are not brave enough to do. Not only did Dr. Kevorkian save hundreds of patients from dying very drawn-out, painful deaths, but he also provided peace of mind to the families. Dr. Kevorkian was very passionate about his work, but he also recognized just how serious his field of study was. Whenever a terminally ill person would reach out to Dr. Kevorkian, he made sure that they had been evaluated by a psychiatrist to rule out any depressive or irrational thinking. Once they'd passed the psych evaluation, then Dr. Kevorkian would spend time getting to know them and eventually would allow the patient to decide whether they would give consent for Dr. Kevorkian's procedure or not. Now you've got to ask yourself, does this sound like murder? Absolutely not, and Dr. Kevorkian has video proof of the consent given by every single one of his patients.
Do you want to go on?
No, I don't want to go on.
You don't want to go on living?
I don't.
How can you convict this man of murder when the patient's family has literally thanked Dr. Kevorkian for helping their loved ones? What Dr. Kevorkian did was not evil. He was a doctor under oath who promised to ease his patients from pain and suffering. When a patient gets to the point in their life when they can see the end is near, there's no killing. They are already dying. What Kevorkian's machine did was prevent both the patient and their family from having to go through a long, drawn-out, traumatizing experience that comes with a terminal illness. Dr. Kevorkian provided a peaceful release from this world instead of standing idly by while his patients suffered. Think of our pets. We treat them better than we treat our own people. When a dog becomes old and begins to fail, we bring them to the vet because that's the right thing to do. How incredibly selfish is it to keep a suffering animal around just because you are not ready to let go? If we live by this for our pets, why is it so difficult to understand the same concept when applied to real people? When a perfectly sane man or woman suffering from terminal illness has decided and made peace with the idea of death, so should society. In an instance such as this, the ultimate choice of quantity or quality must be made, and the choice must always be quality. As for Dr. Kevorkian's patient, Mr. Youk, it has been recorded that he gave full consent and, more importantly, understood exactly what he was asking Dr. Kevorkian to do. Mr. Youk was unable to administer the IV to himself, which is the only reason that Dr. Kevorkian performed it. The video that he took is just a testament to how confident Dr. Kevorkian was in his method. Logically, if Dr. Kevorkian had done anything even remotely wrong or unjust, then there's no way that he would have wanted to record it for the world to see. His intentions were 100% pure, as he was simply using his knowledge and skill to help relieve patients of their suffering. I urge you to find Dr. Kevorkian not guilty, as he's just a doctor living by his oath to ease suffering.
Before you click away, make sure to vote in the top right corner for who you think won, and thank you so much for watching.